the matter of the leak of the contents of the so-called reform of the Constitution, which has been produced by the Ramadan Committee. I just want to tell you that sometime in the not too distant past, I received a letter from the Prime Minister in my capacity as leader of the opposition, I think it was, saying that the Prime Minister intended to appoint a commission to look at the Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago. Something which we had no problem with. And I was invited to name 2 people to this commission. Now, something like a commission should really be an all-party affair where everybody who's involved, all citizens and their representatives, should have some input. So we had no problem with the government taking the lead and saying that we are going to do this. So I wrote the Prime Minister and I asked her for clarification because it wasn't clear to me what exactly was being asked of me. Is it that the commission would have a set number of members and the opposition would be given, as of right, a certain number of persons on this commission? Or am I being asked to put names forward and the Prime Minister would choose willy-nilly or accept or reject as she sees fit who we put forward? Because these are 2 quite different circumstances and we needed to know how it was going to work. Is it that our nominees would be there as of right representing the opposition, or is it that they will be chosen, may or may not be chosen by the government who's advancing the process? To this day, I have never received a reply from the Prime Minister on this matter. A matter as important as that, I have never received a reply. So I took it to mean that the government is not really serious about any reform of the Constitution. And then, having given it to the leader of the COP to make himself useful in the government, and having gone about it the way they've gone about it, I am not surprised that scribes are now describing the output as the worst of the offerings of reform of Constitution that we've had, among the many that we've had. But I find it quite unacceptable for the government to be leaking bits and pieces of such fundamental changes as being proposed. And we don't know where the government is going with this, except to say that the PNM will not be led by its nose or any parts of its anatomy into any fundamental change to our Constitution to please anybody who think that it's their time now to do it. And because of how the government has behaved, we're putting the national community on notice that the government intends to make this exercise part of its election campaign and lifeline in the coming general election. In the same way, they came to Parliament within hours of the local government election, being advised by their handlers that their position would be improved if they rammed through the Parliament something called proportional representation for local government, create chaos and confusion, and praise themselves for bringing fundamental change to the electoral process, the end result of which was not a single alderman in the East-West Corridor anywhere for that matter. And it did not in any way contribute to any improvement in the electoral process. It was an attempt to give the government an advantage which failed, and the same way they came unashamedly on the verge of the local election, being in the Parliament within hours of the deadline, ramming this thing through the Parliament. We expect that a similar kind of development is being planned for this matter of reform of our Constitution. We're simply putting the government on notice that where it involves support from the opposition for any of their adventures and their folly, the PNM will provide no accompaniment. We are quite prepared to engage in discussions with the national community. As a matter of fact, we are prepared to discuss amendments to the Constitution based on treating with our understanding of where there are shortcomings and how those shortcomings can be rectified. And in terms of whole-scale radical changes of the Constitution as proposed, we believe that the discussions have not been properly entered into. The population is too far away from it, and this thing about the government telling us what we will do on these fundamentals for election purposes are wholly unwelcome. And what we are asking the government to do now is to make the report available to the public and indicate to the population where the government intends to go with this. We are not prepared to be surprised in Parliament one day before election or one night before election with the government using its supine majority to try and rush this through Parliament and stick us with something like we were stuck with for the local government election. And incidentally, while the government is doing this, we want to let the government know that Tobago's expectation and request for full internal self-government within the understanding of the preservation of us as one nation is something of high priority. And since we haven't heard it or seen it being part of this exercise, we are not clear that the government acknowledges that it is the government of Trinidad and Tobago. And the aspirations of the people of Tobago are as important as those of the rest of the country. So this exercise, we see it as wholly unacceptable, and the government is setting us up for some election night exercise. The PNM will not be part of that. While we are open to proper discussions and a proper arrangement for amendment to our constitution, we are not open to being railroaded by a misleading majority in the parliament.